It's a great pleasure to introduce someone who I imagine is well known to most of you, one of the stars of our department, Lisa Dixon. Lisa has made a number of contributions to our understanding of schizophrenia and its management. She's the professor, she's professor here, the Edna L. Edison professor. She also directs the Division of Behavioral Health Services and Outcome Research. She is the editor-in-chief at Psychiatric Services. And if I were to read to you all of the different awards and grants and about her important papers, I'd leave very little time for her talk, so I won't do that. But I will tell you that she's taken on some of the very toughest and most important issues in the management of schizophrenia, not content to study sort of the carefully selected patients that make it into clinical trials. She's worked on the role of family and family support to the recovery process. She studied individuals who not only have schizophrenia, but maybe homeless or have substance abuse, are wrestling with major medical problems, diabetes and smoking and so forth. And it's, I think that her insistence on studying things that are important and pose great challenges, that is one of the hallmarks of her work and one of the reasons that her work has been so influential most recently. She's turned her attention, both in the state and nationally, to first episode psychosis and made great strides in that area. I've known Lisa for a long time. We first met when Lisa was a resident and I was an assistant attending at Cornell. And I remember in the old days, sometimes we'd go to grand rounds and we'd sit together and we'd kibitz about the speaker. I'm not urging you to do that today, but we had fun with that. And then Lisa went on from her residency. She went to the University of Maryland and did her did a postdoctoral fellowship, research fellowship there, and she rose all the way from a fellow to a tenured faculty member. And in those days, the University of Maryland, they teamed up with Johns Hopkins. They were an absolute powerhouse in the mental health services world. People like Don Steinwachs and Howard Goldman, Tony Lehman, they really defined the field, and Lisa's work was an important voice in all of that. And you know, one of the things that Lisa has a number of wonderful qualities, but one of the things that really stands out to me is that she's so knowledgeable and so conversant in the field of assessing and managing schizophrenia that she's at home and can talk perfectly comfortably to all of the stakeholders, to patients, family members, frontline clinicians, people who run programs, people who oversee policy, people who fund research, the patient advocacy community, as well as researchers. Again, she's got the flexibility of mind to be able to connect and teach and learn from all of those groups. And it's that quality that I think has made her work so important. So without further ado, I hope you'll join me in welcoming our very own Lisa Dixon.
Okay. Everybody's welcome to kibitz. That's a great word. Thank you so much, Mark, for that. I'm grateful, and I think as I look in the audience and I see so many of the people who support me in the work that we do here, I just want to acknowledge that this kind of recognition has to be the recognition of sort of the teams of people that work together. And I've been very lucky and really love to come to work every day, and that's part of what I hope I will communicate to you. But a word about Dr. Mumford. Let me see if I can figure out all the... Okay, I'm not going to talk about my title yet. I'm going to talk about the social transformation of American medicine. And I was really excited, actually, to receive this recognition reading about Dr. Mumford because actually, one of the reasons, well, there were two main reasons I went into medicine. One of them had to do with the fact that my brother got schizophrenia. And you guys might consider that to be a very important reason, I mean, in this crowd. But there was actually another reason. And that was I took this course from Paul Starr when I was a freshman at Harvard. And he apparently, he was working on this book, The Social Transformation of American Medicine, and it was an introduction to sociology class. And this book just blew my mind. It eventually won the Pulitzer Prize, but in this book, he kind of went through the history of medicine, the history of what doctors do, the history of how disease is defined, how we in the healthcare community are perceived, and what is measured. And he showed that that is all this incredible result of complex social, economic, and political forces, as well as, health. And so I said, this is something that I want to be in the middle of. Not, because it's complicated and interesting and fungible and changeable and influenceable. And so in some ways, I think of Dr. Mumford as kind of the extension of some of the work of Paul Starr, or maybe the predecessor of some of the work of Paul Starr. And so I feel particularly grateful in receiving this award, and I'm only sorry that I didn't get to meet her, because I think I would have liked her. Okay. All right, going backwards a little bit. So, the title of my talk, I've already received some feedback about that, is Scaling Evidence-Based Practices a Lost Cause. Like, one person said to me, they're not going to know what you're talking about. And another person said, why are you being so negative? But, I actually really did struggle with putting this talk together and sort of trying to think about what I want to convey. And I'm just going to, I'm going to begin with the end in mind, I'm going to answer the question. The answer to the question is no. It is not a lost cause. And there are ways to do it. And we here at PI are in an incredible position to do that. And, if I could sort of define my goal, for this lecture, it would be to pick off just a few of you and to have you call me or have you call some member of my team and say, I have some ideas and I would like to do, I'd really like to work with you or talk about some possible projects. So that's kind of my goal. Okay. So this is, I always show the slide. The latest research shows that we should really do something with all this research. And then this is my actually very favorite slide. I utilize the best from Freud, the best from Jung, and the best from my Uncle Marty, a very smart fellow. And I think, if we could sort of put together kind of what could be the best healthcare, it would be sort of putting these two notions together. Where, we look at evidence and we look at science, but then we also, build upon our experience and our reading and learning, and sort of that, I think, is connecting those dots will help us with really, doing a bang-up job in the care system, which we don't do. My overall objectives, looking at the barriers to scaling EBPs, strategies to scaling EBPs, and then frameworks that facilitate this process. And actually, Mark and I were talking beforehand, we do have to come up with a different name for evidence-based practices. It's like somehow that it's become old or stale or something. We need to rebrand. We need to rebrand evidence-based practices. And that's actually one of the things that you learn is branding is really important when you're doing dissemination and technical assistance. And so, what am I going to talk about with these? I guarantee you I'm not going to go over 5,000 models of implementation science, okay? We're not going to do that. We're going to try to breathe above sort of the sea of implementation science models. And we're going to talk about the Center for Practice Innovations. That is the center that I have the privilege of overseeing here at PI. We'll talk about our charge, we'll talk about how we approach the work, and hopefully you will see, in fact, that, again, the answer to the question is it's not a lost cause. Okay, so what is the Center for Practice Innovations? The Center for Practice Innovations, and this is like our well-crafted words, supports the New York State OMH mission to promote the widespread availability of evidence-based practices to improve mental health services, ensure accountability, and promote recovery-oriented outcomes for recipients and families. And we serve as a key resource to OMH by spreading these practices identified by OMH as most critical to accomplish OMH's system transformation initiatives. And I know that probably sounds like a lot of blah, 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 blah. But here's the bottom line. OMH gives us money to scale evidence-based practices in the state. And when I say scale, it means like not just New York City, not just Rochester, not just Binghamton, but the whole state. And we have 20 million people in this state. And also, the other kind of key point here that I want you to hear is that we're not really paid to do research, all right? We're paid, to do the implementation and the technical assistance. And so, that's this kind of tension here. If you think of research as creating generalizable knowledge and generating, and also just generating evidence that what you're doing is working, we have to kind of walk that fine line. Okay. I want to acknowledge the parents of the Center for Practice Innovations, the people who created this 10 years ago, or now almost 11 years ago, Bob Myers, Mike Hogan, Susan Essick, and Lloyd Sederer. And you see a picture of Ann Sullivan. But this was a real vision that actually Mike and Susan and Lloyd and Bob cooked up. And it began with this kind of recognition that substance use and mental illness were a huge problem in community treatment programs in New York State, and we had no way to tackle that problem. And so the CPI was born out of this desire to tackle the problem of dual diagnosis with the creation of essentially an online learning system and set of courses that would teach the practitioners how to do this. And that's where it started. So it started with this notion of scale. It started with this notion of using technology. And it grew. And what you see here are the initiatives of the Center for Practice Innovations, around which most of our work and most of our funding is delivered. So we start with focus on integrated treatment, individual placement and support, ACT, assertive community treatment, and wellness self-management, which is New York's version of illness management and recovery. And maybe not everybody in here knows what these are, but these are well-established evidence-based practices in the care of individuals with serious mental illness. And you'll learn a little bit more about them over time. Then in the next era, we added initiatives. We added On Track New York, which is first episode psychosis. We added suicide prevention. We'll talk a little bit about that. This is sort of a core competency Medicaid transformation activity. And then what do you see? You see OCD, you see cognitive health, you see psychopharmacology. And again, my point being that over time, and as we accumulate experience, we're starting to be able to bring in more practices and more tools to try to influence the service system in New York State. Here's the CPI leadership. And again, I want to make a couple of points here. You see Paul and Nancy and myself, Hella, who runs the ACT Institute, Sapana, who runs a network provider, and then newly OCD. And with Sapana, we have Blair. Now suddenly Blair Simpson is working with the Center for Practice Innovations to support the implementation of OCD in New York State. And she has a vision of early treatment for OCD. We have Alice Medelia, who'd been doing some work with the state on cognitive health, and now we've brought her into the fold because we know and we can see that we can really bring this cognitive health to scale. We have Barbara Stanley, an accomplished, both Barbara and Alice, accomplished investigators here at New York State Psychiatric Institute who have started, earlier in their careers. They were, trying to understand the mechanism of these kind of clinical problems, and then developing interventions and testing interventions, and then test, efficacy, effectiveness, and then now scaling to across the state. And so now, again, I'm just very pleased that we're starting to recruit more of the incredible expertise in different illness processes here that affect individuals in the state of New York into the Center for Practice Innovations. I also wanted to just note that in red here, we have several functions that are absolutely critical to the center. Help desk are the people who support our online training, learning management system. We have data management. Again, this doesn't happen without data. And again, the development of our online learning modules, which you'll see more of as we go. This is the group. I want to point out my very cute little dog who's here. We had a little event at Central Park, and I got to bring my dog. Okay. Those of you know me as I'm a little dog crazy. Okay. We have this kind of work does not happen without input from stakeholders. So we have a provider advisory committee in the same way, that we nothing about us without us. And again, our targets here tend to be providers. And so in order to do this work well, we need to have input and guidance from providers. And so this is a kind of a foundational function for us at CPI. Okay. That's the background. Okay, so so what is the service setting? And this is this whole issue of like, why do I like to come to work? Okay, why is it meaningful to me to come to work? Okay, well, there are 38,000 full-time equivalents employed by not-for-profit providers of mental health services in New York State. We have almost 7,000 slots for assertive community treatment. We have almost 8,000 slots for people who are receiving PROS programs. We have almost 3,000 day treatment slots. You see what I'm saying, okay? Here, and this is from the OMH website, this is 2017 Medicaid services, 617,000 people receiving services within OMH or OMH licensed facility in 2017, paid by Medicaid at a cost of $7 billion. All right, so this is important, this is big. If we can influence this, if we can make a difference, it has the potential to really help a lot of people. And again, we have the famous 17-year odyssey from research to practice. And then finally, just the last bit of evidence sort of justifying why this is important. This is from SAMHSA, URS, I forget what it stands for. Utilization something something. Anyway, they survey all the states and to try to get some estimate of the extent to which people with serious mental illness are receiving specific evidence-based practices. And I don't think I need to explain how pathetic that is. So we have a lot of work to do. I mean, it's very low rates of use of evidence-based practices or exposure to evidence-based practices nationally. Okay, so thirdly, I don't know how many of you guys were at the last 2 grand rounds, but we learned a lot about implementation science in these last 2 weeks. And when I got to CPI, there was a lot of great work going on, but I could not wrap my head around it. I couldn't describe it. I couldn't explain it. It was a little bit kind of idiosyncratic by initiative. And so we all sat down together and tried to figure out, what is our frame? What we need a roadmap. We need a roadmap so we know where we've been. We need a roadmap because we need to know where we're going. And we need a roadmap so we can measure or assess whether we are actually going in the right direction, okay? Or if we're going in the wrong direction. So we together kind of canvassed the implementation science literature and sort of tried to identify a roadmap that would be helpful to us, not constraining, not artificial. I mean, to be honest with you, my implementation science colleagues will get mad at me for this, but I'm not interested in knowing the subscale of a leadership scale that predicts whether, people are happier on Thursdays, okay? And I really we wanted a framework that would sort of anchor us to the big issues that the state was expecting from us, okay? And so this is a little bit the difference between implementation, trying to do science versus trying to kind of have an impact in real time. Because we also we don't get a lot of time in the real world. We got to have results quickly. So we used the Dam-Schroeder framework, which, and sort of selected this notion of the inner setting and the outer setting. And for us, the inner setting is essentially inside the agencies, and the outer setting is sort of what impacts, or the regulations, policies, et cetera, that impact the incentives within the agencies. And then we layered on top of this notion of the inner setting and the outer setting. And you'll see how this all plays out in a minute. This notion that we need to have, again, a sequence, an order. You can't start at the end. You have to start at the beginning, right? And so that, we borrowed from the Replicating Effective Programs framework, initially published by Kilborn, and identified this notion of pre-implementation activities, implementation activities, and maintenance and evolution activities. And what you're going to see, and I'm going to show you how we diagram it here now. So we have this overarching practice change model with an outer setting that kind of focuses on policies, regulations, fiscal reimbursements to programs, et cetera. And then on top of that, we have pre-implementation. So how do we begin to deal with these outer setting challenges, implementation, and maintenance and evolution? And what are the things that we do within the outer setting? We work with OMH to develop clear expectations, to develop incentives, and to embed expectations into program structure, for example, standards of care that are reviewed during licensing visits. So we try everything we can to sort of connect what we're driving for, or what OMH wants us to drive for, to kind of the organizational and outer setting frame that all of these programs live in. And then inner setting kind of have the same thing. We have the inner setting activities, which you guys would recognize as the training, okay? And once again, we have pre-implementation, implementation, and maintenance and evolution. And you're going to see, well, I think, so yeah, so what are the key inner setting training and implementation supports that we use? What are our tools? We used a web-based learning management system that hosts our interactive electronic learning modules, webinars, resource libraries. We also use face-to-face training, face-to-face consultations and coaching, and evidence-based learning collaboratives, okay? So again, you're going to see more of this. But those are the tools of the trade. So when we go and talk about the initiatives, you're going to see this over and over again. You're going to see inner setting, outer setting, pre-implementation, implementation, post-implementation. And we're not going to go into the details, but what I want you to see when we walk through the initiatives is that there's a discipline here, that we have to each time make ourselves accountable to this structure. And if we find the structure doesn't work, we get rid of it and we create a new structure. But so far, we're not unhappy with it. Okay, so in terms of also conceptual framework and science, so this is kind of the science-y part of the talk. So how do we embed ourselves in science? One question you might ask is, you do all these learning module things, Lisa. You do these learning collaboratives. Do they work? Do they work? All right. What do we know about what do we know about learning and adult learning and training in terms of these tools? And the two specific tools that I'm going to just be reviewing very briefly are the online learning tools, the modules, and learning collaboratives. And so in terms of, well, what do we know about online learning? And I know there are many people in here who are very knowledgeable about this. Basically, is online learning effective? Well, it depends what you're comparing it to, okay? So if you compare it to nothing, no training, it's pretty effective, okay? And that's actually usually what happens, okay? People are either getting no training or online training. Compared to another training strategy, for example, in-person training, the effect sizes vary, but in general, internet types of training is at least as good, if not better, with small effect sizes. And of course, the key thing here is that the use of particularly asynchronous online modules is much more efficient, because it doesn't take all the people time. Okay, again, so are some types of internet training, internet-based training better than others? While evidence is not rock solid, there are certain qualities that online training modules that are associated with more effective learning. Interactivity, practice exercises, repetition and feedback, et cetera. So again, we're trying to sort of maximize the impact of these online training tools. More recently, there's been research on technology-enhanced simulation, which isn't just restricted to online modules, but just to say again, technology-enhanced simulation is also found to be effective. especially when it's compared to nothing. And then now there's this whole kind of focus on self-regulated learning, and so as opposed to instructor-supervised interventions. And I think one of the key messages there is that you want to kind of have a shared, you want to have some self-regulated learning and some instructor-driven learning. And again, the point here is that is not for you all to come away with an extensive knowledge of this field, but just to know that it's there and that we need to be sort of doing applying evidence-based approaches to learning and collaborating with experts in this area, which is what we do. I'm not an expert in this, but we partner with companies and folks that do know how to build modules that are kind of, that are informed by the evidence of instructional design and adult learning. The second piece of the second main tool that we use are learning collaboratives. I think last week, Dr. Carroll discussed learning collaboratives, if I'm not mistaken, and certainly Dr. Palinkas did as well. And learning collaboratives are sort of, everybody does learning collaboratives, and nobody even knows what they mean when they say they're doing learning collaboratives. So, but this is changing and evolving, and so there's at least been 2 reviews that are, that define learning collaboratives and ask the question, well, what do we know about the effectiveness of learning collaboratives? And again, there are these learning laboratories. If you get any emails from the National Council, you get an email every day about a learning collaborative that they're making. They were adapted from the Quality Improvement Collaborative models used in the IHI series, and they're really used globally. So just, again, not to get too far into the weeds on this, but there was a really nice review that recently came out that looked at the use of learning collaboratives in general medicine, okay? So this is not just mental health. So does involvement in quality improvement collaboratives compared with usual care lead to improvement? They had a pretty robust and strict set of requirements for inclusion in this study. And again, I highlighted what I wanted you to see, sort of what are the qualities, what are the characteristics of a learning collaborative. They can be face-to-face or virtual meetings. There are often visits to other sites. There can be visits by experts or facilitators. There's web-based activities to report changes, results, and comparisons with other teams, and there's coaching and feedback by improvement experts. And so one of the things, so this is from this particular review, the thing that I want you to see is that often learning collaboratives they use hybrid tools. There's some sort of, more formal learning activities, modules, lectures, but there's also a lot of interactivity, exchange of data, dialogue. And what they found in this review, basically that the vast majority of these learning collaboratives there was effectiveness. Now, it's not perfect, and again, so significant improvement in at least one primary effect measure in 83% of the studies. And so it's an evolving field. It's very hard to do robust research in this area. But again, I think that, to my way of thinking, they're useful, and again, I think if they're done right, they can be effective. And there's another review that actually Kimberly Hoagwood and her team did recently that focused just on mental health learning collaboratives. And again, these are not the strongest designs, mostly pre-post designs, but again, the majority of these studies found some improvements in learning collaboratives. Okay, so we have a roadmap with inner setting, outer setting, pre-implementation, implementation, and sustainment or maintenance. We have tools for the electronic learning modules, learning collaboratives, those are our 2 most common tools, leavened by some in-person activities, and a partnership with the Office of Mental Health that allows us to sort of connect these activities to outer setting guidance. Okay, so now I want to talk briefly about, to show you some of the tools and what we do and how it works. So this is the landing page for the CPI website. If you log in to the website, this is what you see. And what you see here is icons for each of our initiatives, and then several other tools and paths within our learning management system. Everybody here can have a login. The state pays for something like 23,000 participants in our learning management system. So we have a lot of users. Okay, so as we said, we have modules, and what I want you to see here is that we have modules that are highly variable in terms of their focus, general knowledge. These are our initiatives, and then we've developed something that we call core comps. And then what I want you to see here is that, and you'll see a little bit as we go, that our first modules were these very structured 40-minute courses, with some talking heads and some role plays and things like that. But over time, as the field has evolved, so have we, and so have the vendors that we use. So we do videos, animations, and you'll see, I'm going to show you an example. Full-length modules, but with micro-learning, and again, this notion, I know Melissa and I've talked about this of, what is it, find your own journey, or, something. Yeah. Knowledge builders, and so the point is that if you were to go looking around in our learning management system, you're going to find a lot of diversity of modules. And another thing that we've done more recently is we're pulling in the consumers and families, so we have a front-facing area on our website where consumers and families and people who are outside of New York State, providers, can access some of this material for free. And we have found, again, that, we need to bring the consumers and families in as stakeholders. And here you see some of the material that we have on our website that's, again, front-facing, primarily for consumers and families. And there's a lot of videos and animations and things like that that are more sort of educational and inspirational. Again, as I mentioned, our modules have changed and evolved with an expanded audience, shorter micro-learning, emphasis on interactivity, photojournalism and animation, et cetera. And the other thing that we've actually done is we've packaged some of these into curricula. Okay, and so these are just some screenshots from the different types of modules. There's Lloyd. And again, you can see there's interactivity here. This is something on our front-facing on our website about mental illness and work. Mental illness doesn't have to keep you from achieving your hopes and dreams. This is a core competency with micro-learning, so people click on each one and just do these activities. This is a screenshot. I'm going to show you a little bit of this. This won a couple of awards just recently in the industry, a gold and silver award, and where other like big corporations have won. So we won something that we're doing with the city. And again, I'll show you a very brief clip from that. This is what is psychosis. The state has also asked us to create little animated videos that help patients know how to navigate the system. So here are some of these, again, screenshots from helping patients figure out how to use health homes and how to, anyway, how to access HARPs and that kind of thing. This is what we did from the RAISE project. And what you see here is the aggregate number of modules that have been watched over time. So you see we're almost at 400,000. And when I look at that, I say they better be good, okay? Because that's a lot of time people are spending watching these things, all right? And we don't want to be wasting their time. And you see here, this is the monthly total. And again, it's almost 35,000 people that have, unique people that have watched our modules. Okay. Again, we're in every county except Hamilton County. We don't know why Hamilton County doesn't like us. There may be like one provider there, but anyway. Okay. And again, this is a screenshot of a paper that we published, led by Nancy Koval, that kind of describes and I want us to be publishing all the time because it makes us accountable and it makes us subject to peer review. And so, you'll see a number of papers that we publish as we go through. But this described our use of a learning management system, distance technologies, and quality improvement and incentives. And here again, what kind of incentives we use for training participation. And here, again, you can start to see some of the tools we use. And just think inner setting and outer setting. So we use financial incentives, and there are some non-financial incentives. And then just before we move to the initiatives and watch a little bit of the modules, I wanted to make another point here. We collaborate with a lot of different entities, agencies around the state. And that's in part because that's what we have to do to meet OMH's requirements, but it's also because other entities have approached us. They see what we do. They want to work with us. And so we've now developed a number of sort of sub-projects that are kind of not necessarily part of our core function, but enable us to reach out, extend, do more innovative things, and then, we bring in money for that. And this is an example of one of those. This is actually an internal example where we partnered with Roberto and the Center for Excellence in Cultural Competence to make a module that shows how to use the cultural formulation interview. And then they were able to study this internationally and, just get feedback and pre-post tests in terms of, how people experienced the cultural formulation interview. Okay, so I want to show you. So these are just 3 very brief clips from 3 modules.
This is Michael. He's just started college and is usually friendly and outgoing. But lately, he's not been feeling himself. When Michael leaves his room, he is convinced that strangers can hear his thoughts and are following him. He feels frightened. When Michael's alone, he is certain that he hears voices telling him that something bad is about to happen. What conditions are associated with psychosis? Symptoms of psychosis are associated with some serious mental illnesses. Schizophrenia typically flattens the emotional expression in people's speech, tone of voice, and body language. Schizophrenia always includes symptoms of psychosis.
So that's a 5-minute video. You just saw, 40 seconds of it.
My drinking was much more severe and much worse than when I was 27. And by this time, I knew that I was an alcoholic, but I couldn't stay sober. And I had been fired from one job, and that was devastating to me. But I remember thinking about suicide every day. I thought I was done, and I thought, that life wasn't worth living.
Sadly, Jamie's story is not uncommon. According to the Centers for Disease Control, 121 people take their own life in America every day. You can play the role of recognizing someone at risk and getting them connected to professional help. You don't have to be a trained counselor to prevent suicide. You can learn to notice warning signs, engage in a conversation, ask directly about suicidal thinking, and if necessary, refer the person to a trained counselor.
And this is the last one. You'll recognize the
Hi,
first voice.
my name is Dr. David Lowenthal. Welcome to the training on means reduction counseling for suicide prevention. Means reduction, also sometimes referred to as means restriction, is an approach we use to help suicidal individuals reduce their access to the methods they are likely to use in a suicide attempt. The aim of this course is to provide you with strategies for implementing means reduction counseling.
Now, given what you've told me, I think we should discuss how we can make your environment safer, reducing your access to guns so that you have time to work through any suicidal crisis you might experience.
How's that gonna help?
Well, have you had suicidal thoughts involving other means?
No, but that doesn't mean anything. I mean...
Suicide attempts with guns are extremely lethal. And since you've thought about shooting yourself and guns are readily available in your home, they pose the highest risk to you. Now, you should know many people may have an intense urge to kill themselves that lasts only for a few minutes. Now, if this happens to you, having your guns unavailable at that moment could save your life.
The last course is just about to be released, and it is really good. I mean, like, I watch it, like I said, I learned something from it, and I can stick with it. Anyway, very proud of it. Okay, so now I'm going to just go to the initiatives, all right? We'll see if, if you believe that, I'm full of it, or if we're actually really doing something. Okay, so I'm going to start with individual placement and support. This is directed by Paul Margulies. This began years ago. Now, how many people here know what individual placement and support is? Can you raise your hand? Okay. So it's a very robust evidence-based model to promote competitive employment for people who have serious mental illness. It's integrated into practice. It's focused on rapid placement. It's not long periods of training. Everybody, you don't have to be stable to join and receive IPS. Very, very robust. So what do? Again, under the direction of Paul Margulies and our implementation specialists, we have a series of learning collaboratives that include both in-person training, online support, and collection of data at each monthly meeting. We now have 3 sets of learning collaboratives. We have one set, 2 are in prose programs. One is for what we call sort of the beginners who haven't really got the, caught the method yet. And then we have another set where we call our sustaining programs. They know how to do it. They don't need the same level of support as the beginners. And then now we're also working in state ops. Okay? I'm not going to go over this, but just so you see, we always look at, our activities extend outer setting, inner setting. And what do our data show? We show that for basically all of our collaboratives, where we meet or exceed the published threshold for what would be expected for rates of employment in IPS. So that's somewhere around 40 to 50% of the individuals who are served by the providers who are in the learning collaborative are employed. When you're thinking about an evidence-based practice, you're thinking outcomes and fidelity, right? So are these programs, are they true to the model? And so what we have done is we have piloted and tested the notion of self-rated fidelity. And what I want you to see here is that now we have published a paper that has assessed the relationship, the correlation between self-rated fidelity and sort of gold standard fidelity. So again, my point is here that we have used learning collaboratives to bring IPS to scale in the state within over 100 programs, and we're doing it achieving outcomes that are to be expected with the evidence-based practice, and also having then also created, contributed to science, I think, by assessing the extent to which we can rely on self-reported fidelity in this context. The other thing I just wanted you to see, which you're going to see again, is that we now have OMH tracks our activities using a dashboard. So we're at the point now where we've sort of created a dashboard where Bob Myers and our folks at OMH can sort of assess what we're doing. Okay. Now ACT, assertive community treatment. How many people here have heard of assertive community treatment? Okay, more of you. Okay, so it really takes the most challenged and challenging patients in our system who have not who have not really responded to the normal kind of services we provide. And New York State has made a huge investment in ACT. We have over 100 ACT teams. And our ACT Institute, led by Hella Thorning, has an enormous job, okay? But just, again, to hit the highlights here, we provide ongoing training to all the ACT employees. And the main focus, one of the main focuses of OMH has been shifting ACT from a service that's forever to a service that's time limited. Because if it's not time limited, then we will never be able to serve new clients. And there's, anyway, we can go into some of the science on this. But again, inner setting and outer setting. This slide just shows you the strategy for developing the training and curriculum, again, which involves getting input from stakeholders. What do they need? What do they want? What do they lack? Trying to break down the training needs into knowledge, attitudes, and skills, and then trying to sort of enact those needs and deploy them in a practical way. And so what you see here is the core curriculum for all new ACT employees, and I think they also have to get them every 5 years or something. And here you see our focus on knowledge, which largely comes from our learning modules, and our focus on process and skill building, which comes from some of the more in-person activities. And it's actually by regulation, every single ACT employee needs to get this done within 6 months of hire. And this is what it looks like in our learning management system. Again, there's all these different roles, and so there's a lot of different training activities. This shows you, one of the hard things about this is that you have process outcomes, and then you have participation outcomes, process outcomes, and you have outcome outcomes, right? So this is more or less a participation outcome. We're getting people to do the training. Now, would I rather have patient-level outcomes? Yes, I would. But again, this is the real world, and we sort of try to identify meaningful outcomes at each level. And what you see here is, this is a huge challenge. 960 people, getting them fully trained with all these requirements. And in terms of the length of stay or time in ACT, what you see here is that we've gone from 2008 to 44.4 months, to 2014, 32.4 months, to October 2018, 28 months, all right? Now, can we claim that's all due to the training that we've done? But we've had a very, very intense focus on transition. And we have a moderately evidence-based transition strategy that was actually developed by Molly Finnerty. And what we're seeing here is some reduction in length of stay. It's actually pretty significant without increases in rehospitalization rates. Okay, and so again, the point I want to make here is that as we do these things, we want to subject our work to the literature and peer review. And you can see here again, time and assertive community treatment, a statewide quality improvement initiative to reduce length of participation, et cetera. Okay. Now we have focus on integrated treatment. This was the original initiative that was, again, focused on dual diagnosis. Of late, we have been focusing more on really two things, tobacco dependence and agency readiness what's called dual diagnosis capability for combined treatment. Here again, you see our dashboard. This is just some data. This is from a recent learning collaborative. So a lot of the work in the dual disorders areas we do with learning collaboratives, and here you see the red line represents dual diagnosis capability after the learning collaborative. The blue line represents dual diagnosis capability before the learning collaborative. And just so you know, so this is 14 programs, and Nancy Koval, who's again an amazing person who runs this initiative with her implementation specialist, I'm after this initiative because I want us to be able to offer training activities that go beyond just 14 programs, all right? That's not good enough. We need to be 25, 30, 35 so that we're actually affecting more programs. And here's another reprint from a paper that, again, demonstrated that we could use distance technologies to implement stage-wise treatment. And in this paper, again, it was looking at the results of a learning collaborative. Could we get patient-level outcomes? No, it was a little difficult to do. But what we could do was look in the charts of patients who were seen in the agency and determine if, for example, their stage of treatment was identified and if they were receiving services consistent with their stage of treatment. Again, it's not outcome, but it's a reasonable process outcome. Okay. I probably don't need to spend much time on On-Track New York. I think most of you have heard about it, but here again is another of our initiatives. We have the advantage in On-Track New York of really being able to control a lot of the levers. We now have, again, 21 programs throughout the state. Our current activities are, again, supporting these 21 programs, and now we're at a point where we're actually trying to layer research onto the On-Track program. But again, just so you know, in terms of implementing this, we have to pay attention. Outer setting, inner setting, pre-implementation, implementation, and post. You can see where we are. You can see, we've recruited 1,229 clients from the beginning of the program. This is our engagement. We have a lot of data in On-Track New York, so we can actually look at outcomes. So hospitalization rates, engagement in work or school over time, and you see we start at 41% and we're up at 75%. Again, this is our dashboard, and of course, we're very active in the literature. Now remember, this is not research, okay? We don't have a control group, but what we do have is a robust learning community built around this initiative. Next is suicide prevention, and again, this is an example of, again, if I'm talking to you guys at NISBE, Barbara Stanley, who's been here for 30 years developing suicide prevention methods and techniques, and then she comes to the Center for Practice Innovations at a point in her career where she is ready to scale interventions. And it coincided with the development of the Suicide Prevention Office in New York State. Barbara developed this model that is consistent with zero suicide of assess, intervene, monitor, and Barbara's the master at boiling things down to simple, memorable notions, right? And what's very cool about this SP TIE, I mean, they're also trying to create new interventions, et cetera, but is that they got a huge R01 grant to test this AIM model in 200 clinics representing 80,000 clients in the state of New York. And it's essentially a cluster randomized trial. Milton was involved in helping us design it, where we're comparing a basic implementation strategy to an enhanced implementation strategy. And in this study, which is ongoing, we will see if, if the expense and time and effort that is a part of the enhanced implementation strategy gets better outcomes. Next initiative is system transformation, and this is a tricky one because it's not really an evidence-based practice, it's a system change initiative. And here, I think, we're really, this is where okay, the state is supporting us, we have to do what the state kind of wants us to do and offer suggestions, and mostly what we're doing here is we have created a core curriculum for all clinics and agencies the core curriculum which the agencies clinicians need to complete in order to sort of be a part of these MCO networks. Can we, do we believe that watching a module on, cultural competency and, one module on stage-based treatment, I mean, do we believe that that's going to change practice? No, we do not believe that. We are not foolish enough to think that watching 3 or 4 modules is going to make a difference, but we are engaged. We are engaged with the state in this activity, and we believe that eventually we will be able to roll this into something that's more robust and more, I think more ambitious. But right now, this is what this is all the state feels it can do to move the system around training in the new Medicaid transformation world. I'm almost done. Now we were lucky enough to attract David Lowenthal to come and work at CPI. And why was that a great thing? Aside from the fact that Dave was a great guy, the other reason is that we had really no attention to psychiatric treatment or psychopharmacology or virtually any other medical aspect of any of these evidence-based practices covered. And so Dave's mission is for us to conceptualize what it means to include the psychiatrist's medical role in the support of these EBPs. And I can tell you there's really no place that I'm aware of that has really included the psychiatrist. So we're also starting with some basic psychopharm. We think we can do a way better series of a psychopharm update than is typically marketed out there for doctors, and so we're working on that now. But again, I think this is just started. Dave just joined us, and he's been sort of poking around all of the initiatives to try to understand the role of the physician in these training activities. I mentioned cognitive health. Alice Madilia has just joined us, and the interesting thing about Alice is that she had sort of independent of CPI been doing some work with the state with Lloyd Sederer. She developed this cognitive remediation to promote recovery program, and many of the state operated facilities are doing this in the outpatient clinics. But it hadn't been sort of connected to CPI, and we started to work together. I was like, well, Alice, you should really be a part of CPI, and we should be able to leverage what you're doing, and you should be able to your stuff should benefit from partnering with us and vice versa. So we're kind of in the beginning of this partnership, and already I think we've gotten a couple of grants to introduce cognitive health into On Track New York. But the point is that the idea here is to bring cognitive health and cognitive strategies to scale in New York State, and we'll see where this takes us. And you can see that both Alice and Allie and Matt Ehrlich and Lloyd published a paper on their initial work, which wasn't done within CPI, but now we've brought into CPI, on cognitive remediation in large systems of psychiatric care. I think this is last but not least, is our initiative to, as I've already mentioned, to focus on supporting the identification and the delivery of evidence-based care for obsessive-compulsive disorder. Obsessive-compulsive disorder we know is incredibly under-detected and, probably not treated in in most clinics throughout the state, if not the country. And so we're tackling that with the support of Bob Myers, and again, Sapana and Blair are working on that. So we're at the very, very beginning of this initiative, and so we're really in this pre-implementation phase, okay? So we are learning more about how and where individuals with OCD present in the New York State OMH system. We're brainstorming strategies to raise awareness about OCD and engage interest of providers and leadership. And we're beginning a little bit the implementation activities, because we've done some work. We figured out there's a lot of ignorance. We know that we've learned that there's real deficits in knowledge. So we're starting with a webinar that Blair's done before on 7 misconceptions of OCD. And again, so stay tuned on this. We're very excited about how this is going to unfold. So I'm going to just conclude by kind of sharing with you something that is like you're reading and you're reading and you're reading and you say, oh, that's what we are. Like you recognize yourself in what you read. And I didn't realize this, but we are, in fact, an intermediary organization. And this is, I guess, a thing that has evolved over the last several years. And intermediary organizations, they provide consultation and technical assistance activities. They do training, public awareness, and education around EBPs. They do quality assurance and quality improvement. They are also purveyors of evidence-based practice, but we are more than just a purveyor. We have an expanded role. We do outcome evaluation and research. We do some policy and systems development, and we do some best practices model development. And it seems like this entity, this phenomenon is of sort of becoming increased interest to funders and kind of organizations that are trying to deploy evidence, improve quality of care, I should say, And so we're why was this such a revelation? Because I know, well, we sort of do research, but we don't do research. We work with the system, we work beyond the system, we work within the system. And so again, to sort of see that this is something that is emerging as a kind of, in some sense, a technology in the field. So is scaling evidence-based practices a lost cause? I would like to say, no, it can be done. I don't think we do it necessarily perfectly. We don't do it, completely consistently, but I think that if you're focused on it and you have some resources, you can begin to have success. So I would just conclude with the following observations. It is possible to work within the public mental health system to provide strategic technical support for implementation of EBPs. Distance learning can promote efficiency. It is difficult to establish effectiveness of the EBP support without dedicating resources to assessing training processes as well as fidelity and outcomes of treatment. And I would put forward to you that with the initiatives, within our initiatives, we're better able to establish our effectiveness with those initiatives where the outcomes are simpler, like work in IPS, it's a very simple outcome, and also where we're able to leverage data systems and invest something in the evaluation process. And again, so then that leads me to that we have to rely on a range of data sources and designs to make inferences. We're not doing all perfect double-blind randomized controlled trials. And I say that in terms of our overarching theme, we are oriented toward self-examination, maximizing inquiry, and making ourselves accountable. And that at least in New York State, we have a lot of opportunities because of the Medicaid transformation. And, finally, what is success? I mean, it always comes down to the patient. It always comes down to the patient. That, we have to keep this is truly our goal. And I would put forward to you that, in the last bullet, an empowered clinician, supervisor, and agency lead, who knows that they contributed to making this happen is also part of our goal. Thank you. Mike?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
You want to call people out?
Yeah. I see Milton's hand. Do I see any other hands? Oh, and then, yeah, I got it. Okay. Go ahead. Yeah. Mark, why don't you do it? Because I'm not good at this. Go ahead.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So we got this question over here. Yeah. How many psychiatrists does it take to?
Yeah, I'm one of your happy customers. I hope I'm counted in that 37,000. But what I really wanted to know was, do you have a real sense of what kinds of encouragement and support OMH clinicians are getting to get access to this? I'm also totally convinced about distance learning,
right,
for modules like this. But in other words, not just whether it's out there, they know CPI is out there, but are they using it? Do they give you feedback?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so let me just say that, again, the answer to that question sort of lies within the initiatives because they're very different, okay? So with IPS, we know who's on the phone calls, right? There's a monthly, for the more intensive initiatives, there's a monthly call, people are on the phone. ACT, on the other hand, that's required, okay? I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, something in OMH or in the state government that gets mad at another arm of state government for not doing something decided that all the ACT clinicians have to go through this training. And so now, it's mandated, and we give reports back to agencies who's done it and who hasn't done it. Now, on the other hand, with, employees of clinics for Sapana's initiative, I'm sorry, the care, what's the name of it? Where we have to touch everybody. The uniform, thank you, uniform care providers, right. maybe 20 or 30%. But that doesn't surprise me because I'm sure the clinicians don't see the immediate relevance. This kind of slightly artificial, not necessarily tied to practice and outcomes training. So I would say that, if we think about in the pre-implementation and the implementation, we build in incentives, and we try to, we use all kinds of incentives. So in the focus on integrated treatment, if individuals do the entire course, they get a special certificate signed by both commissioners that says that they've done this certification process.
Can I have just a real quick follow-up? Besides courses and registering,
Right.
what about people having access on their desk to ability to get this, so that when that particular problem comes up or an issue with a particular patient, they can then access the part of it that they want?
Right. So that really is getting at the question, really, of the extent to which any of these learning modules are useful in real time, right? And remember that, think about how all these training tools have shifted over time. We didn't have that 10 years ago, right? But I would say that we are now more and more trying to create modules that will offer tools that a clinician could sit and together with the patient fill out a form or a treatment planning kind of document, or go right to the particular point where they're going to find the information. But I would say that that's something that we have to do better. We're just beginning sort of that little bit. It's almost like point of care help. And it begins to merge with something that I think, we heard about last week, which is, internet CBT, or some of these actual treatments that are delivered online. So you'll notice that you didn't hear me saying that. You didn't hear me talking about online treatment. You heard me talking about online training, all right? And so, if I were to, the crystal ball, is probably we're going to start to see the coming together of those two, of these two processes. Although I still think there's going to always be a role for some of the, the separate online training. But I would say, we're probably like a B- in that, C+ in that area. We're, that's what we aspire to do better. And if I'm sorry, one other thing would be, if there is anybody in this audience who's got, working on, say, an internet-based treatment that thinks, well, maybe there's a way to I can be the one to help you connect these dots, I would welcome that.
Wonderful presentation. You started by the challenge, who was going to work with you, and the idea that I've done 2 little entry points with Alice and with Barbara. Get ready, we're going to do much more. I think that the same way that health professionals look at mental health, that they get a little concerned, what do I do if I ask questions and they're hallucinations and they're suicidal? That's how we feel about implementation science. We're so afraid of it that we don't want to ask the questions, but you have to ask the questions. Because implementation science is common sense. And it's how to make sure that everything that you're doing also you can do, as you started, Mark, with cost offset. Because if you learn what it costs to do all of these, and we can measure at the patient level, we need to talk more about that. Because if I can do that in Mozambique that has no resources, and I can do trainings in tablets in Mozambique, and where there are 18 psychiatrists for 29 million people, I'm sure that we can do something here. Maybe there are too many politics involved. What I love about what I've heard from you is that I think when I first met you, implementation science felt like, oh my God, I don't want to hear about it. And we're converting you. And I think that's a wonderful task, because there's a lot that we can, your programs can teach the rest of other places what can be done. And it's very important, not just by looking at the product, but other things that we can offer. So get ready. We're going to do some things.
Thank you, Milton. I mean, I can see several research studies within our initiatives. We need people to help us do them.
But I have to just share something about the research studies. It doesn't have to be a randomized clinical trial, and still can have very rigorous science behind it. So,
yep.
Great. Other questions? Other people?
Hi. I'm fascinated by this. You've got so much data, and I think a major effort should be going to harnessing the data that we already have. When I say to harnessing it, we're talking about data that we've got from Medicaid, data that we have from our computerized medical record system, data that you have from pharmacies, data that you have from labs, from visits. I think a principal problem and possibly a good use of resources is to figure out a way to harness that. And a modest suggestion would be, I'm not sure anyone on your team has a background in artificial intelligence, in big data, and in software development engineering. Wouldn't that be a useful person to add to the team so that you could take a look and harness this data and possibly answer some of these questions? You know, I'm not talking about research. I'm just talking about some queries to get some answers to some basic questions.
Yeah, I think so. You know, and I guess like when I mean, one of the nice things about Scott Stroop's Opal Center is that I think we're going to be able to take some of the funding and that is a part of that center, and then apply some of that expertise to some of the material that we have in this OMH space. But you know, it ultimately it does come down to, you know, we have a budget, and you know, and I'm just being really practical, which is that, you know, we have certain deliverables, we have contracted activities that we have to do, and there's not a lot of wiggle room. So everything that we do that's extra is kind of like we're being, you know, we're using, you know, sleight of hand, you know, trying to get extra money, extra resources, which is again why, like, I feel like we're at this point where in this room, in this institute, there's so many people with so much knowledge that if we can have a win-win. And then if I can, you know, develop a proposal, I can pitch OMH, you know. So Tom Smith has a new measurement center. And so part of what I'm looking for will be how that measurement center can interface with OMH, with CPI.
Other questions?
Thank you for that. You know, it seems to me in some ways we sort of have this a Promethean problem of by having successfully, to some extent, destigmatized psychiatric illness and increased awareness. What we have right now is so much more need than I think we, you know, when we even expected that would have been out there. And so I know it was mentioned, but I just want to emphasize the role of primary care, because I work with a reach organization and we train pediatricians to do mental health, and that started here, but branched off. And just the your thoughts about starting from medical school, the extent to which, I mean, the old pediatrician expression, we don't do dental, we don't do mental.
Right.
I'm wondering reverse from the very early on.
Yeah, I mean, so my association to, I mean, I think your comment is right on. You know, what's interesting is, of course, we're a medical school, we're a residency, so a lot of us in the room are very focused on trainees, right? But in CPI, we're not focused on trainees. We're focused on, you know, the workforce that's been out there for 5 to 50 years, none of whom have gotten, you know, the kind of training probably that we would, you know, like, which maybe we're hoping that we're giving now. But anyway, my one association that I have to your comment is that we have tried, and we're trying to push, is to see whether we can get more into primary care settings or health homes or medical homes, and we're also trying to do more training around medical issues, you know, our mental health teams around more medical issues, and we're starting to do some of that, but then you get to the politics, right? So that then becomes, it's not OMH, it's DOH. I mean, we just have a request. We have a request. I got a phone call this afternoon because DOH wants us to wants access to our learning management system for their for some of the like care coordinators or case managers. And okay, they want that, and we're like, yay! Okay, they want it, and then we can. But who's going to pay for it? and because it's not free. So that's where we're at now. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Melissa.
Thank you, Lisa. This was really wonderful. I just wanted to, I don't have a question, I just wanted to underscore what you were saying about the challenge of educating people in practice. And I think as a training director and looking at the level of the medical student and the residents, we have open learners who are excited to learn a new thing. And one of the barriers I think we hit is when the field advances beyond what the teachers know. And so, and then you're stuck with this dilemma of how do you get everyone up to speed? So this comment about like, how do we, about possibility of embedding this in primary care settings and how do we train? This is the challenge with integrated care and trying to move education forward with integrated care, that we have to train the trainers to be able to train our students. And so I just want to commend the kind of work you're doing because it's so important.
Your comment makes me think of a couple of things. One is it's also, I was talking with Bob Myers yesterday, and he's saying, you got to mention supervision, Lisa. You got to mention supervision. Because, in these mental health settings, I mean, it's probably even in primary care settings, we can do the teaching and instruction, but the follow-through and the maintenance and the support is going to be with supervision. And in some ways, those are the trainers that, and so that's part of our challenge. I guess the other thing I was going to say is that I don't want it to seem like we're the only ones who are doing this. Like, actually, many of the big agencies in New York State have training programs and do have training activities, not necessarily the smaller ones, but many of the bigger ones do. And part of our task is then to sort of connect with them, support them, give them added value, and also challenge them if we don't think they're doing what they need to be doing. But I mean, there's an industry, and what we want to be able to do is to kind of focus it in the direction of quality and evidence-based practices.
If I could just make one more comment, I mean, I think a major challenge that I've seen in terms of trying to advance the field in neuroscience education is really a culture shift, in this idea of what lifelong learning means, because we have this rubric where the supervisor or the faculty member on the floor is the expert, and they're not necessarily going to be the expert in everything. And so how do we change that dynamic where it's okay for everyone to be learning side by side? I see that as a major implementation challenge in med ed.
Yeah.
Maddie,
I
go ahead.
wanted to ask a question about keeping families and consumers informed about really what I think is phenomenal training efforts that you're making. Are there resources where, say, a family wants to say, I want to go to a trained, someone who's taken advantage of these trainings, or go to a facility, so that they're making
it's the demand side, right? It's the demand side of the quality challenge.
And to keep it informed.
Right.
So are there...
Yes.
I mean, I know there's NAMI people, but in terms of CPI,
right.
is there portals that families can enter?
So let me just sort of, to summarize, we're the supplier. So we're what you've seen here is a lot of the supply side, like trying to provide better care. But there's the demand side, right, which is our users who, and we know that demand, plays an important role in the care that people get. So the answer would be we do definitely do some of it. What does a good dual diagnosis informed program look like? We have a short video for patients and families, and actually Nancy Koval is making another one for consumers on stage-based change. I think many of the videos that we have on our consumer and family portal directly describe what good care looks like, what it can feel like, and So this is a direction that we're definitely going in, but I would say that we're probably not doing enough good measurement of it and how it's working, and but my hope would be in a couple of years it's much more developed.
Okay. Others? Well, if not, I have a question for you, sort of a broader question. You've taken us inside a lot of different interventions.
Maybe
some
too
of which
many.
some of which deal with intervention, some which deal with complex behavior, some with disordered populations. And all of it's done in New York State, where, as compared with other states, it's a much more well-resourced environment. And I know that you spend time outside the state, you're on the national circuit, and so as you look at other states, where do you think the and you think about much more resource-constrained environments that they're working in, where do you see as the sort of low-hanging fruit, as a state that was sort of thinking about getting started and dipping their toe into this sort of work? Where would they start?
Well, let me answer a different question. So people may be aware that SAMHSA is really changing the landscape around the technical assistance dollars that they're giving out, and they've created these for SMI. They've created these regional technical assistance centers, and then there's a national technical assistance center. And I can just tell you that our phone is ringing off the hook. And actually, so Ben Druss is the head of the Southeast Center, and we've already begun conversations. And I think that, and actually I told them I would give them this slide deck, which, maybe some good will come out of it. And actually the head of the National Technical Assistance Center is interested in this, and actually some Canadians. So I think that, what do I take from that? What I take from that is that we're at a place now nationally where there's some recognition of sort of this notion of whether it's purveyor organizations or intermediary organizations, and there's some expertise. And so, a lot of this is local, right? So what are the local rules? What are the local, resources, opportunities? Who are the opinion leaders? And so they're going to take, and we're going to work, we'll be providing technical assistance, some of the technical assistance centers. In terms of low-hanging fruit, I would just say that, I think that, as I start with suicide prevention, I think they're all possible. Because we've really tried to distill some of our technical assistance down to some really, really core elements, and to do it with a modest amount of resources and some ability to assess fidelity. But I could say ACT, because we get a lot of calls about ACT. Yeah. Because even though the training is expensive, the program is very expensive, right? So, but I think, I think maybe there's going to be more interest in this whole notion of ACT as a time-limited service.